Hi, this video is about the practicalities of icing when flying light aircraft in Europe. People die as a result of airframe or air intake icing on a regular basis, and you need to take it very seriously. I'll only touch on the theoretical side of things where it has a direct impact on the way we encounter and deal with ice in the real world. There's lots of useful material on the internet about the theory, and I encourage you to watch as much as possible, but I'm only going to focus on what it's like day to day, how to reduce the chances of flying through it, and what actions to take should you encounter it. So, let's start with the practical effects of icing. This is dependent on four things: the airframe, engine power, engine cowling, and the type of ice. There are plenty of airframes that stay in the air because they are beasts pushing everything out of their way with their power and ugliness. I would cite the Aztec and the Cessna 182 as examples. Their aerodynamics are unsubtle, and if something starts by being like a brick, when extra mortar is thrown at it, it takes it largely in its stride. I've been in Aztecs, Chieftains, Cessna 404s, and even PA-28 and Cessna 172s, carrying far more ice than is healthy, and, while they've slowed down, they've stayed in the air and motored on through. Please don't take this as an endorsement of the practice of flying through ice, but the practicalities are that you are likely to be worried rather than truly endangered. At the other end of the scale are designs which depend on their precise shape. This is true of laminar flow designs, designs with stepped wings, vortex generators, and other features which carefully hone airflow to allow performance with relatively lower power. I'm not an expert, but Cirrus, DA-42, Columbia, and some Moonies come to mind. If you have an airfoil that depends on its highly efficient design to enable the aircraft to fly, then clearly any ice deposits, or, it is said, even dead flies and bird droppings, are going to have a serious effect on performance. Another thing which I'll throw in here is the question of tailplane stalls. We all know from our early studies that in a conventional aircraft with wings at the front and tailplane at the back, the wings are producing upwards lift. So when they stall, lift is lost. The aircraft will pitch forward and descend. We know that lowering the nose and applying power will recover us to controlled flight. But the tailplane produces negative lift. It pushes down. Now, in normal flight, a tailplane stall is unlikely, but if the shape of the airfoil is changed markedly by ice, it can be the first surface to stall. And if it does, the effect is also to drop the nose, but the recovery is the opposite to a normal stall. This is very likely to confuse the pilot, as it is never practiced and therefore not recognised, and the natural correction of pushing on the yoke will simply make matters worse. If this happens near the ground, it's likely to be terminal very quickly. Luckily, research has been done, and the conclusion is that a tailplane stall is most unlikely without flap. So if you have to land with ice on the airframe, it's important to land flapless. Now, let's think about the engine cowling and specifically air inlets. These can become blocked by ice, thus starving the engine or engines of air, and hence causing them to fail. The blockage can be of the inlet or due to freezing in the air filter. Some aircraft are particularly prone to this. Aircraft which are likely to encounter icing are often provided with an alternate air source, usually unfiltered air from within the cowling. In some aircraft, these doors or flaps are automatic. They're effectively sucked open when the engine is starved of air. In others, the pilot has to notice a fall in manifold pressure and open the flap or flaps manually. In some aircraft, it's recommended to open the alternate air source at the first sign of ice. Alternate air is often warmer than ambient air and can cause a drop in performance, rough running, or even, I've heard, detonation, though I've never encountered that myself. Although alternate air sounds similar to carburetor heat, it's really very different. Carb heat specifically puts warmer air into a carburetor to defeat ice caused by changes in the pressure in the venturi. It can happen at ambient temperatures well above freezing and in clear air. Alternate air is really only about impact icing from sub-zero moisture in the atmosphere. Now, let's look at types of ice. Essentially, there are two types: rime ice, which forms as soon as droplets hit the aircraft, trapping air and stick where they hit, and clear ice, which flows back before it freezes. People talk about mixed ice, but in my experience that just means that some clear ice freezes on impact. Well, of course it does. If you read the books, watch the videos and prepare for the exams, you'd think that rime and clear ice are equally common, but they absolutely aren't. I've encountered rime ice hundreds of times over the years. Indeed, at some times of year at IFR levels, it's more likely than not just an annoying fact of life, and you just deal with it as best you can. While I've thankfully only seen proper clear ice very few times in my 50-odd years of IFR flying. But in all those encounters with rime ice, I've only felt in real danger once or twice, having to declare an emergency just once, as I descended despite full power and a minimum safe speed. On that occasion, after landing safely, I left a wonderful imprint on the outline of my Cessna 404 in broken ice on the ramp, just like the lines drawn around the murder victims in film noir. But on a conventional brick aircraft, generally rime ice builds quite slowly and just slows you down. I'd say that 10% of your airspeed is not uncommon. You see it develop quite slowly and you get used to where to look on your aircraft. It might be on a strut, on an OAT probe. On my aircraft the telltale is the windscreen wiper. It forms usually quite gradually on leading edges and can be broken off with wing boots if you are so equipped. As I said a moment ago, on a laminar flow aircraft it could be much more serious and you really need to prevent it and stay out of it. Clear ice is a different matter. I've only seen it a couple of times and it can really be frightening. On one occasion in an Aztec it was as if someone had thrown a massive bucket of ice at the aircraft. I could see it move backwards towards the control surfaces at an alarming speed. The interesting thing about that encounter is that I had flown through the same air mass for the previous couple of hours, in and out of benign-looking fluffy cumulus clouds, without much vertical extent, and then whoosh! One of these clouds turned out to be completely different to all the others, and indeed to any other I've ever encountered, and was full of juicy big supercooled droplets overwhelming the aircraft. Clear ice, which flows back substantially, is very, very nasty, though thankfully rare. One clear ice phenomenon which is well documented and understood is freezing rain. I've never encountered it, and I sincerely hope that in my remaining years of aviation I continue to avoid it. It can render an aircraft unflyable very quickly and is likely to overwhelm any de-icing equipment on light aircraft. Its formation is almost always forecast, and my only advice is to remain away from areas of freezing rain laterally or vertically. Normally speaking, remaining clear vertically entails climbing into warmer air, and it's unlikely that, if the aircraft is already affected, it will have the performance to do so. So you need to be above it before you reach it. But if you choose to fly above it, there's the issue of technical problems such as engine failure, forcing you to descend into the unflyable conditions. Frankly, I'd rather stay on the ground. Let's briefly discuss the anti-icing and de-icing options available. By anti-icing, I mean what you do as you anticipate an ice encounter, and by de-icing, what you do once it's accrued. Before we move on to airframe protection, we must remember that to fly in or where there is a risk of ice, there are some other basics. Pitot and sometimes static port heating. In all aircraft, losing the pressure instruments is going to be a challenge, and especially so if ice is going to reduce airspeed while increasing the stall speed, narrowing the margin over the stall. But in some aircraft, it becomes critical, as pitot static blockage can also remove the PFD. Older Aspen systems are well known for this, presenting the pilot with nothing but a red cross, not what's needed when they're already struggling through icing clouds. I always keep pitot heating on in flight, and I recommend that, but it certainly should be checked whenever there's any possibility of icing. Some aircraft also have stall warner heat. As stalling is a real hazard in icing conditions, this also should always be switched on if there's any possibility of icing. Prop de-ice is really important. It's not just a question of changes in the aerofoil shape, reducing the performance of the blades, and even possibly making them stall and produce no thrust, but the risk of differential ice formation, creating imbalance and possible shaking and even engine detachment. For that reason, it's vital to know how many heating sectors there are on your props and to ensure that all of them work before a flight that could possibly encounter icing. Most systems have 4 sectors cycling on a 30-second per sector basis. That's too long to wait during pre-flight checks, so they're designed to cycle on each power application. So you need to switch them off and on as many times as there are sectors and check for current on each sector. If you're missing a sector, then do not fly into potential icing conditions. Get your maintenance people to show you how to fix it in 2 minutes with Scotch-Brite, so you're not grounded nor tempted to take it into the air. If you fly a twin and encounter ice, you're likely to hear cracks and bangs as the ice flies off the prop blades onto the fuselage. This is unlikely to be seriously damaging, though it can chip paint. Many twins are fitted with sacrificial plates for this reason. Another necessary protection, which can seem extremely expensive to maintain compared to the utility, is the heated windscreen or panel. Even if we encounter ice at altitude, by the time we land, most of us will have shed most of it, most of the time. Because of that, there can be resistance to paying €35,000 or whatever to having your windscreen replaced on a €100,000 aircraft. But I've had to land with the windscreen completely obscured by ice, and it is not a good thing to have to do. I mentioned alternate air earlier, so I won't go through that again, but it's a vital part of the de-ice package. That leaves what many of us think of as the principal element of anti and de-icing, how the flying surfaces are protected. There are 3 methodologies. One of them, heated surfaces, does not appear in the kind of aircraft we're talking about here, so we'll leave that. The other 2 are boots and TKS. They differ very fundamentally. De-icing boots are rubber strips along the front of the flying surfaces which expand into ridges powered by air from the suction system. When covered in ice, the expansion is supposed to break that ice away. Anti-icing TKS systems pump de-icing fluid out through panels, also along the leading edges, and the fluid flows back over the wing. Each has advantages and disadvantages. On boots, ice must be allowed to build up before they're activated, so they only work once icing starts and is established. TKS, on the other hand, is deployed in anticipation, or at least at the first sign, and is supposed to prevent ice formation. Boots only clear the front 10 to 15 centimetres of the surfaces. Anything that flows back beyond the boots cannot be reached. TKS, on the other hand, flows back and protects the entire surface. Boots only dislodge a proportion of the ice on them. There always remain areas and mounds of ice which cannot be shifted, whereas TKS tends to produce completely cleared surfaces. Boots only cater with flying surfaces, hence the need for all the protective systems like windshield and propeller heat, whereas TKS can also be used on the windscreen and props as well, where TKS fluid is sprayed directly onto the windscreen and prop blades to prevent or remove ice. So, you might think, why do boots even exist? TKS is so obviously superior in every way. Well, that's true until you start looking at some practicalities. First problem is range anxiety. You set off with a certain quantity of TKS which you use in flight, and when it's gone, it's gone. Normally you have plenty, but the anxiety starts when you have heavy icing and have to keep using it. Then you find yourself running out on the very flight when you need it most. My opinion is that TKS is fine for pressurised aircraft which are pretty much guaranteed to remain clear of icing most of the flight and only need protection in the first and last 20 minutes, but not so great for an aircraft which is destined to cruise at levels where there's weather. The second problem is cost, both the capital cost of the equipment, but much more importantly the cost of the TKS fluid, which is significant. Both range anxiety and cost can in turn lead to a reluctance to use the system until it's definitely known to be required, which is often too late. Another issue is availability. It's almost certainly available at larger IFR airports, but much less likely at small club airfields. TKS systems need to be run regularly, say monthly, to prevent the pores clogging. This is expensive and it takes between 5 and 15 minutes to flush the system, and there's a temptation to skimp. And if you're not the sole user, there needs to be a rotor to ensure it gets done. The time you don't want to find out that the system is clogged is when you need it. TKS is generally a messy, unpleasant substance to deal with. Luckily, I don't believe it's either corrosive or toxic, but it's just messy and unpleasant. So, to summarise, TKS is like Longfellow's little girl. When it's good, it's very good indeed, but when it's bad, it's horrid. The opposite can be said for boots. They're reliably sort of okay. I would also recommend running the de-icing boots regularly, even in the summer, and that's probably on your checklist. It keeps the lines clear, as well as alerting you to potential problems. A little word about fuel icing. If you use jet fuel, you'll know whether and under what circumstances you should use Prist, and I cannot say any more. But if you're flying an avgas aircraft in very cold conditions for an extended period, you may need to use a de-icing additive. There are two types of water in the fuel system. One is the stuff that you drain out in your pre-flight, which is generally the result of ingress, often through leaking filler caps or forced in through vents. The other is the water that's dissolved in fuel. It can come as a surprise to many that water can and does dissolve in fuel. It's usually less than 0.5% and causes no problem with combustion, but the problems arise when it's cold soaked and forms ice crystals. These crystals can block filters and even pipes and can stop engines. This outcome is very type dependent. I had multiple engine failures on my Aztec before I worked out how to solve it, but it's never been a problem in the Navajo. The solution is to add 1% isopropyl alcohol, also known as propanol or IPA, to the fuel. This absorbs the water. The cost of isopropyl alcohol is extremely variable. If you buy it from the pharmacist to clear your ear, it costs over €350 per litre, but if you buy it as an aviation additive, it costs about €20 per litre. Buy it off eBay and it costs about €2 a litre, the same or less than the fuel it displaces. It's a good idea to pre-mix it with the fuel before putting it into the tank to ensure mixing, or it can form a globule. The next kind of icing I'm going to describe is of the crankcase breather. And how do I know this? Yes, you guessed, another engine failure. The crankcase is pressurised by the back of the pistons as they fall from the induction and power strokes, and the breather vents that pressure by expelling the products of combustion, which are largely water. If that water freezes in the breather tube, the crankcase gets pressurised, meaning firstly that the engine loses power and eventually something has to give, typically the crankshaft seal, though luckily in my case it was the oil filler cap. This situation is prevented by a whistle valve in the breather, which was missing since manufacture on my left engine. Do yourself a favour and at the next check get the shop to do a visual inspection to be sure that there is a whistle valve. If there isn't, it's the work of a moment to put one in and requires no parts, just a hacksaw and a pair of pliers. Now, a word about de-icing, that is, removing ice on the wings and prop before flight. There are two types of ice which forms on the ground, hoarfrost and glaze ice. Hoarfrost is an opaque layer of ice like what you scrape off the windscreen of your car after a frosty night. Glaze ice is like clear ice. It forms after precipitation falls on a frozen surface and is a transparent layer of ice that can cover an entire wing or airframe, which, because it's clear, also makes it more difficult to spot. It's denser and harder than hoarfrost and harder to remove. Both types of ice can disrupt or alter the airflow over aerofoil sections, and glaze ice will make the aircraft considerably heavier and possibly affect the centre of gravity. It's vital that there's no ice on the airframe when you take off, or you may never get off the ground, or, if you do, go straight into a stall or spin. Failing that, you might get control surface issues and be unable to control the aircraft. If you wish to know more, you can Google or YouTube for clean aircraft concept. Avoid ice building up on the ground by limiting the time the aircraft is exposed outside rather than sheltered inside a hangar. Where ice is present, the best way to de-ice where conditions permit is to leave it outside in the sunshine to melt off. But if you do, be careful that the whole airframe is clear, possibly by turning the aircraft. Otherwise, brush any easily dislodged ice or snow off with a broom rather than a credit card or other sharp scraper which would damage the paintwork. Then use a garden spray filled with a mixture of 45% ethylene or propylene glycol, 45% water and 10% isopropyl alcohol. Propylene glycol is considered safer and better for the planet than ethylene glycol and is nearly as effective. You can buy this fluid ready mixed as Shell Compound 07, but if you mix it yourself from product bought on eBay, it's a fraction of the price. Spray the whole aircraft and leave it on the surface. Make sure there's enough to dislodge all the ice and then taxi promptly before any ice can reform. If you're delayed at the hold and ice begins to form again, you must abandon the departure and go back to de-ice again. De-ice mixture provides no anti-ice protection in the case of continuing active frost or further precipitation. So, finally, let's talk about how you forecast ice formation and how to avoid it if you encounter it. In general, icing is more likely to be encountered in clouds above the freezing layer with high liquid water content. Such clouds would be cumulus clouds, particularly CBs and thunderstorms, which is another excellent reason to avoid these clouds, and orographic or wave clouds. The tops of the clouds often contain the most liquid water. Stratiform clouds tend to carry less water content, although can be conducive to slow, steady accretion. There are many people much cleverer than me who can predict icing from raw meteorological data, but I'm very happy to let those clever people embed their knowledge into weather models that I can access easily. There are many products, both on charts and online, but I'll focus on two: Gramet and Windy. Gramet is embedded into the wonderful AutoRouter routing engine and gives you a cross-sectional view of your route or plan. The green colour represents the likelihood of icing at an altitude and location. There is a choice of two models to compare. The forecast frequently changes in the days and hours prior to a flight. It's always going to represent a percentage chance, and it's somewhat binary and unsubtle. But if you avoid the green, you'll almost certainly avoid ice. Windy gives a slightly more nuanced overview in a lateral rather than vertical view. It provides the percentage chance of encountering ice, but like AutoRouter, not the intensity. It also offers two models. I have noticed that while the models can vary geographically, they tend to be similar vertically, so the best way to avoid areas of icing is vertically rather than horizontally. Both systems also tell you the freezing level or altitude. This should be at the forefront of your mind, together with the gap between freezing altitude and terrain. As one strategy following a serious icing encounter is to descend below the 0-degree isotherm to clear the ice before landing, possibly to continue the flight at lower levels, you may want to ensure for your whole planned flight that the isotherm is above the MSA, allowing you to descend in relative safety. Ensuring that gap between 0 degrees and the MSA is a required standard operating procedure for many pilots, even when no ice is forecast, and it's a wise choice, especially if you're flying an aircraft without ice protection. I promised earlier no theory, but the only bit of theory I do want to be sure is in the forefront of your mind is that ice can normally only form in a range of 0 degrees to minus 20 degrees centigrade. That means that you're protected both when it's warmer than 0 degrees, but also colder than minus 20. That means in turn that if the outside air temperature is, say, minus 15, then it may well be quicker to get out of icing conditions by going up rather than down. This is particularly true if a climb will take you above the cloud tops, of course, where you can also expect the sun to help sublimate some or all of the ice. Another simple rule of thumb is that the freezing level starts at the ground temperature times 500. So, if it's 10 degrees C outside on the ground, then you can expect 0 degrees C at around 5,000 feet. So, let's end with a bit of what to do if, despite your best efforts, you encounter icing. And we'll use our old friend T-Dodar. If you haven't watched that video, I do recommend that you do. I don't spend my life saying like and subscribe, as does everyone else on YouTube, poor needy souls that probably weren't breastfed as babies, but I'm sure I could be allowed at least to recommend my own videos. Time depends on type and speed of accrual, as well as the type of aircraft you have and its equipment. If you have a slow build-up of rime ice on a de-iced classic twin, there's probably nothing to do for 10 or 15 minutes, so plenty of time to ponder your next move. If you're getting rapid accrual of clear ice on a DA40, it's time to turn through 180 degrees before giving it any further thought, but usually there's time. Diagnosis. How rapid is the accretion? Is it coming in patches as you go through the tops, or is it just building? Is it sublimating off each time you get back into the sunshine? How is the de-icing system coping? How much TKS do you have left? What is the freezing level? How high is the terrain? Options. Stay in the conditions and fight the ice. Descend to warmer air. Climb out of the freezing layer. Turn away, turn back. Divert and land with or without declaring an emergency. Decide and act. And, most importantly, review. Has your course of action made matters better, worse, or the same? Do you still have time to continue to diagnose and determine your options, or has the situation become dire? A very common scenario when airways flying is to encounter icing in the descent. If that happens and you're not equipped to deal with it, you can always ask for a lower level. ATC will always take icing seriously. If you're still accruing icing or not shedding it, ask for a priority approach. Stress the urgency and, if necessary to avoid delay or holding in icing conditions, declare an emergency. I've tried to cover a big topic in a few words as ever. I hope it was useful. See you in the next video.